Okay. Good evening, everyone. As you know, Mamie Yang from the library at Valley Stream. We have a special guest today, Dr. Gladys Kalema. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Zikusoka.
Okay, and her assistant is here too. The doctor is actually coming to us from Uganda, and it is the middle of the night, he said. So I have to thank her very much for doing this. We discussed a little bit about what she should do. She has a PowerPoint, but she said it was maybe a little long. And I figured that we would open it up with you asking her some questions. And maybe you could give us a little, maybe a 5-minute synopsis of your background.
Okay, I will. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
I am a wildlife vet and conservationist, and I would say primatologist and social entrepreneur, and most recently author. I grew up in Uganda in the 1970s, the early 70s. I was born to a family of parents who wanted to do a lot for the country. So actually my grandfather was one of the prime ministers of Uganda Kingdom, which gave Uganda its name. And unfortunately, because of he was a very strong personality, and he tried to convince people to sell land in order to create the first university in East Africa, which was called Makerere. It's now called Makerere University. And so he was assassinated, unfortunately, when he tried to do that. But by that time, he had already signed the agreement. So my mom, the first trauma that really happened in our family was in my grandfather, who I never met. He died long before I was born. So my mom grew up with her later years without her father. Then she met my dad. And my dad was in the first government after independence. And he joined politics as well. And he was one of the senior ministers who was used to be sent all over the world by the president, the first president in that cabinet, President Obote. And then he accomplished so much for the country, including going to places like China and getting a stadium called the Nelson Mandela Stadium, and many other accomplishments that he did. But unfortunately, when President Obote was overthrown by Idi Amin, who I think a lot of you know about all over the world, President Idi Amin, that was in 1971. My dad was in Singapore at a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting when Obote was overthrown. But my dad decided to come back to Uganda because everybody else stayed in exile in Tanzania. And less than a year after he returned, he was abducted, unfortunately, by Idi Amin. He saw him as a threat and was killed. We believe he was killed immediately, although we never really found out. But that time by the time he was abducted, I was 2 years old. So I don't remember my dad. But when I was old enough to understand what had happened, I felt like I wanted to continue his legacy. My mom, all of the whole family was obviously extremely traumatized. All my 5 siblings were extremely traumatized. They were much older than me. But we all felt that we wanted to continue his legacy. And for me, because I had a passion for animals, I tried to do it through my love for animals and my love for wildlife. And my love for wildlife developed when my elder brother, who was 10 years older than me, Katerega, he really he liked animals. So he used to like bringing stray cats and dogs home. I fell in love with the stray cats and dogs, probably more than him. And, really, I felt maybe that was the time when I wanted to become a vet in my early years. But the time that I decided to realize I want to be a vet who also worked with other animals is when our next door neighbor, who was a Cuban ambassador, and his wife acquired a pet vervet monkey. And vervet monkeys are very common in Uganda right now. They're not endangered, but he acquired a pet monkey. And this monkey used to like to come to our home, pull the cats and dogs' tails, steal food for the kitchen. It was really very mischievous. And one time when I was practicing the piano, I felt like I wasn't alone. and I looked over my shoulder and Poncho was watching me. So I thought, well, let me see what Poncho will do. So I moved out of the room. He sat down on the stool and played one note. And I was amazed. He played it with one finger, very, very precisely. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So he can even imitate me to that level. And then I started to get really fascinated with primates. I realized that primates are actually extremely intelligent. Not only do his fingers and fingernails look like mine, but he's also can do almost anything I can do. A number of years later, and then I got a chance to set up a wildlife club in high school. And when I set up the wildlife club, it was a turning point in my life, because then I really felt like I wanted to be a vet who works with wildlife. And then later on, I ended up becoming Uganda's first wildlife vet after going to vet school in London, Royal Vet College, University of London. And then later on, we started a nonprofit. So I think the rest, I probably won't go too much into more details, but but that's kind of been, my background and what has been like something that I've always wanted to do, to continue my father's dream through my passion for wildlife.
So you don't have a very common background. Your background is filled with political people and important people. That's just like amazing, because we here in Valley Stream, we're just like average people. Right? I don't know if anyone here has any connection to anyone of fame or of importance. So we're like the average person. You're really like almost royalty, sort of. It's amazing. Okay, so I there's only a few people on right now. I'm hoping to keep more people on. So if you have some questions, please feel free to ask. Okay. I know that she has a varied background, and now, do you come back and forth to United States? Yes, we have. Is your life, part of your advocacy is to travel a lot, or do you spend most of your time in Uganda?
I would say most recently I've traveled a lot to the United States because of the book. But typically before writing the book, I would spend maybe 75% of my time in Uganda and 25% of my time traveling to raise money for the nonprofits and just to, attend conferences, share our findings, and seek more support for the organization. But now, most recently, it's all travel. It's all been, my whole schedule has been changed. I was in America in April. That's when we started the book tour. So we spent about a month. I traveled with my husband, who's also a founder of Conservation Through Public Health and a social enterprise called Gorilla Conservation Coffee. So I traveled with Lawrence for quite a bit. And I came back again to America very recently. I've just been in Alaska, actually. So actually, my time zones are still trying to settle down to Uganda right now. I came back from Alaska last Saturday. I attended the American Society of Mammalogists meeting. In 2020, they gave me an award, the Aldo Leopard Award for Mammalogists, which was a great honor. I know that Aldo Leopard was a very famous conservationist in America and an environmentalist. But because no one could move, during the time of COVID, this was the first in-person event they've had together with the International Mammalogical Society. So it's been really interesting. I gave a keynote speech about our work. And so, yes, that's why I've just come back from Alaska. So I'm still trying to adjust to the time zones here.
Hi. How do you adjust to the different cultures? Because you came from Uganda, but you lived a different life than the people who were in these villages with the gorillas.
Yeah.
And it's just like you have wonderful education, and they're still trying to create schools and go to them. How do you juxtapose that? And how about your two boys?
Actually, I would say that I learned a lot from my mom, because my mom was one of the first female politicians in Uganda. And she, even if she came from a privileged background, she had a big heart for social work. She actually did her social work in Edinburgh University when my dad went to study there and do economics, and they eventually joined politics after that. And she's always used to drag us to a lot of community events when I was growing up. So sometimes I would be bored, but I think at the time it was preparing me for what I've ended up doing now. You know, being in the rural communities, spending time with people who are less privileged than you are, and trying to make a difference. So she's been doing that all her life, and I've been watching her doing it. She actually wrote a book called My Life is Butter Weaving. And her book came out in 2021. It's about her life it's such an autobiography about, you know, being one of the first female politicians and mentoring people who became speakers of parliament, women politicians and vice presidents. And she basically she was in the women's movement in the 50s. Then Idi Amin abolished the women's movement in between. And then she was the link between the old and new women's movements when President Museveni came into power. So she's seen as a female icon. She's currently 94 years old, but still very active. She managed to make it to our book event in Uganda, which is about 2 weeks ago. Everybody was excited to see her there because she's not very mobile at the moment. She uses a walker and a wheelchair, but very, very alert and insisted on making a speech, which she did. They gave her a chance. The American ambassador was actually the guest of honor, which was really nice. But because I've seen her, she really has a heart for rural development. And so as much as I love the animals, I think going with her to community meetings and, you know, meet when she was a politician, and sometimes I attended her rallies, I really got to, first of all, I saw a strong female leader, which I've ended up having to become in the community. But that kind of made me have a heart for people, as you know, really have a heart for helping people. And actually, when we moved elephants, and if you remember in the part of the book, when we moved elephants I built up from an area where they were stuck between two migration routes, between Queen Elizabeth National Park and Murchison Falls National Park in a forest pocket. When the director of the national park said, now we have a vet, instead of killing these elephants, which are raiding people's crops, let's move them. So I had to learn how to move elephants in Kenya. And when we came back to Uganda and I was moving the elephants, it was a very exciting time because that had never happened before in Uganda. And luckily it was a successful translocation. The elephants were all moved and none of them died and no one got hurt. When I got back home from the translocation, she gave me a big hug and said, you know, your grandmother, my father's mother, he said she was a very brave woman. She used to chase elephants from her garden. And maybe the ones you moved are the same ones because it was from the general area. And I thought, okay, that's a nice sentiment because elephants do live for like 70 years. But anyway, she said, you're as brave as your grandmother. So yeah, she always used to say to me, look, I know you're advocating for the animals, but what about the people? The animals are destroying their crops. And I said, yeah, but no one's thinking about the animals. Like no one is advocating for animals in Uganda. So I'm doing that. So we used to have those kind of arguments, but I did get her to come and see the gorillas. She loved, you know, she's really supported my passion. She said, you want to be a vet? I'll always support that. You know, even if it's an unusual profession in Uganda and no one really, you know, everyone who I said I wanted to be a vet said you should become a medical doctor because if you might as well treat people because you like medicine. And I thought, no, but I hate seeing animals suffering. I want to be a vet. So she always said, let her do what she wants to do. And so when it came to working with the rural communities of Bwindi, when I found out that people made gorillas sick, it wasn't the tourists who made them sick the first time around, because that's why I was hired as Uganda's first wildlife vet to prevent tourists bringing fatal flus like COVID-19 to the gorillas. I was hired more. That was the reason I was hired. But actually, what made the gorillas sick was not the diseases didn't come from the tourists, but from the local community. When they go outside the park to eat people's crops and they found dirty clothing on scarecrows. And all of this happens because people have less than adequate hygiene. And when we found out it came from the people, And everybody said to me, you're the only vet in the organization, so you should lead health education workshops to the local communities. I developed the brochures and talked about the risks of human and gorilla disease transmission. And when we went out to talk to the local communities, the first time I went to community meeting, and luckily I went with people who regularly go to communities from my same organization, which was the Community Conservation Warden and Ranger. But we also went out with someone who was in charge of public health at the community level, the sub-county health assistant. So when we got there and I told them what the problem was, how gorillas got sick, and I was about to tell them the solution, the ranger touched my arm and said, let them come up with a solution. And they came up with much better solutions than I was proposing for them. They're much more varied and much more practical. And I thought, wow, it was a humbling moment for me as a veterinarian, because the people we were talking to had not gone beyond elementary education, and they were poor. In fact, the women didn't say anything. It was only the men. Some of them were argumentative and everything, but it was only the men who were vocal. And I realized that people may be poor, but they know what's best for them. And then I suddenly felt a strong bond to the community. And I felt, look, we're in this together. We can actually, I could see the ones who were benefiting from tourism really they didn't want to make the gorillas sick, and I felt like these are actually partners in conservation. We can turn them into partners in conservation. They're suffering most from wildlife, but they stand to benefit most. And the only way we can really protect the wildlife is by working closely with them. So that was a very big eye-opener for me. But something else that I learned along the way later in my conservation journey is a lot of, the ranger said to me, oh, people are whispering, because the language was slightly different from mine. It's different dialect, that part of Uganda. He said people are whispering that they need to educate their daughters, because the women especially, because they saw you, because you're standing up, as basically a woman leading a team of men. And in their community, I mean, a lot of the girls never made it beyond. And once they got to high school and got pregnant, the parents would just marry them off. So they were like, we need to educate our girl child. So that was something that the first time I really got to hear that. And it was important for me to hear it, because it's become very important in my journey and in the way that we're trying to develop the communities and get them to coexist with the wildlife.
Well, your book, great, because it really documents from the very beginning the effort. And I lived in Kenya for 3 years in the 80s, and every other month on safari. So, I mean, I hadn't been to Uganda, but I knew people who lived in Uganda who came and visited and would stay with us. But that was right after Idi Amin was kind of ousted, and
Yes.
they would have house invasions and stuff and come and stay with us at times. But I mean, your foresight is incredible. I mean, the game parks and that I went to, because I went to all of them,
Wow.
so developed, and it was unbelievable business then, it still is. But I think for you to have developed that in Uganda, and your foresight is incredible.
Thank you.
So the book really, it documents the whole journey, and I think it will be an historical piece after you and I are gone, how it all began. It'll be a history for Uganda.
Thank you.
Has the book generated a lot more funds for the organization?
It's still too early to tell because it came out in March, and after doing the book tour in America, I think I got to understand a lot more how, we met new people and made some of them have given donations. And then I also went to the UK after that. So we've got a lot of supporters from the book, because people are very interested. They gave us their emails. They want us to receive our newsletter. So I think it's going to definitely generate more funds. Already, one of our former donors who had come out to Uganda, she came to the book talk in San Diego, because her organization, her family is an individual donor of San Diego Zoo. And when San Diego Zoo gave us a Conservation in Action Award in 2008, it was actually our very first award that we won as a non-profit. They introduced me to her, and her daughter came out to Uganda. They started a high school in San Diego called High Tech High. And so I told her about the book, and we reconnected because we kind of, you know, she still kind of was following our family, but we're following each other, but from a distance. And so she came over, attended the talk. They gave me a behind the scenes. They gave us a behind the scenes tour of San Diego Zoo, because all the zoos I went to, everyone took me to the gorilla exhibit, you know, figuring she needs to see how we're doing with our gorillas. So, but what was very special about San Diego is we met the gorillas who I used to talk about, like during the pandemic, because they introduced me to Winston, the elderly silverback who got COVID. Actually, the whole group got COVID. It was the first time gorillas were recorded to get COVID was at San Diego Zoo. And the old silverback almost died. He was 48 at the time. And he almost died because he got a very severe infection because of his age. And the younger ones were mildly infected, you know, got mild symptoms. The medium ones were moderate. And the older ones, they even showed me another female who was a bit younger than him, but she's now about 45. They both needed monoclonal antibodies, a very expensive treatment at the time. It was very new. This was January 2021. And so when I met him, I was like, wait a minute, they said, this is Winston. I go, I know, I've heard this. I said, I know this gorilla. And then they told me all about it. And I said, I've been talking about him in so many presentations and I also wrote about him in the book, actually. And the reason why is at Bwindi, people were like, but are you really sure gorillas? Because we led the effort to make sure everybody wears masks. You know, they maintain the distance. They don't go when they're sick, because we said they could pick up COVID. In fact, the park was closed for 6 months because we, together with other concerned conservationists and veterinarians and concerned NGOs, we really made a lot of noise about the fact that you can't keep the park open because gorillas and chimpanzees will pick up COVID. And also because there are lockdowns all over the world, the government took it very seriously and they closed the park for 6 months. The president of Uganda actually said that we don't want to make our cousins sick. So we're open for other species. That was in June, but let's wait for the gorillas. And so I just kept talking. I had talked so much about Winston and saying, yes, they did get COVID. In fact, the symptoms, but if they do, is the symptoms going to be like humans? They were like humans. They were age, you know, the older you are, the more severe the infection. And so it helped us to learn a lot about how similar we are to the great apes. And so, yeah, it's been a very interesting time, actually, meeting them. And then, you know, she gave us a big donation afterwards. And just reconnecting, I reconnected with some people. We actually met the scientist in San Diego. He's based in San Diego, who did genetic studies that showed that Bwindi gorillas are mountain gorillas. So I said to him, he needs to visit, but he hasn't visited the Bwindi gorillas yet. I said, you really should, because I said, you'd be given the red carpet. Because once he confirmed that there were mountain gorillas, the only other mountain gorillas were the ones that the late Dr. Diane Fossey studied in the Virungas. Then everything changed for conservation and for wildlife tourism in Uganda, because then they were habituated for tourism. Tourists started to come. And now Uganda has a lot of tourists. And now Uganda is among the top tourist destinations in East Africa. You know, Bwindi National Park, where the gorillas are, volcanoes in Rwanda, where the gorillas are, and then Serengeti in Tanzania and Masai Mara in Kenya. So it really changed everything. You know, it's lifted people out of poverty. It's changed the whole landscape. And so, yeah, no, it was an interesting time to connect with people. And I know some people actually, people ask me what is the next big threat to the gorillas. And I mentioned it a bit in the book towards the end. The next big threat is habitat loss. Because now that we're doing well, that the numbers of gorillas are going up, which is fantastic, the number of mountain gorillas, there isn't enough space for them. The forest is only 321 square kilometers. And the numbers have almost doubled. They've gone from 300 to 500 over the past 25 years. And so they've run out of space, and they're always in community gardens, more and more because of this. So the biggest threat is we need to buy land. And a couple of people I met on the book tour want to help us to raise money to expand the park, because to get the local communities. They do want to sell their land because there's a lot of a lot of wildlife coming onto their land and they can't plant their crops. But it's an expensive activity. But it needs to be done quite soon, because the hotels, the tour operators are building hotels and they're going to fence the gorillas in. Because the local community will sell the land to the tour operators, to anyone who's willing to buy their land, and so that they can move away to somewhere where there's less conflict.
Is the land available around the park?
Yes, around the park. It's actually almost all around the park. It's just a very hard edge, unfortunately. So there's no buffer zone, only in the southern sector. So you find the gorillas come out and they immediately in community land, which isn't good for the gorillas, and the communities complain because, they destroy their crops. So, and then the gorillas also pick up human disease. Sometimes there's conflict between the people and the gorillas and other species like the baboons and other wildlife. Actually, the baboons are more destructive than the gorillas, but people make more noise about the baboons about the gorillas, because they know people are paying a lot of money to see them. No one cares about the baboons, so they won't make as much noise about them, but they're actually more destructive. They can destroy a whole garden, whereas gorillas are more selective.
Interesting, I can believe that.
So when you see the gorillas at different zoos, you said, is that something that, there's a whole movement in the United States to return animals to their natural habitats, and there's a lot of people against the zoos. What was your feeling about that then?
That's a great question. I would say that I think zoos still have a role to play. And I think because when I was a vet student in London, I got a lot of experience working in zoos. The Longleat Safari Park, which is like, a wild animal park, like the San Diego Wild Animal Park, where we went and saw Winston. Then also there are other zoos like Tricross Zoo, London Zoo. London Zoo has received a lot of bad publicity compared to other zoos I've seen in the world, because it's right in the middle of a city. You can't really expand it. So when the gorilla escaped from the cage and ran around, and that made big news. Like, the gorillas are fed up. The vet escaped. And then when I met the vet, because I had a meeting there with the vet there, and he told me after the gorilla escaped, he went and drank a whole lot of Kool-Aid, a jerrycan of Kool-Aid in another exhibit. He just wanted to, and then he went back. He didn't even get diarrhea, which is surprising. But then it's like, yes, zoos get a lot of bad rep. And people are no longer allowed to catch animals in the wild and take them to zoos. It's just not allowed anymore. The only animals that you see, the babies that are born in zoos, are from captive gorillas or captive animals. And so that's kind of minimizing that whole, going to the wild to harvest animals like it used to be done 100 years ago. It's not acceptable anymore. And also, I believe why I say zoos are important is because I got a lot of training as a veterinarian, which then helped me to go back to my home and make a lot of changes. But also they're very important for education, because a lot of people never have the means to travel out of their countries to come to places like Uganda. And even within Uganda, a lot of children don't have the means to go to the national parks, but they can visit the Entebbe Zoo, which is right in the middle of, Entebbe Zoo is right in the middle of, near the airports. And I also got experience there. My son actually wrote a book about his experiences at Entebbe Zoo, zookeeper for a week. He volunteered there when he was 13 for a week. He did a behind the scenes, and he wrote it when he was 16. So a lot of children have loved reading his book, and they've been inspired to visit the zoo. Some of them also are writing their own stories about the different animals they see. So it's very good education to children start to appreciate wildlife by visiting the zoo in this kind of controlled environment. And then eventually, if they can get to the national parks, it's good. So I think zoos are where zoos need to, I think, they need to justify themselves more, is that they need to raise a lot more money for conservation in the wild. They can tell you that an exhibit has cost millions of dollars for gorillas and other species. I mainly know gorillas because those are the species I'm focused on. And they'll tell you, oh, this exhibit in the Bronx Zoo has cost this many millions of dollars. And sometimes we think if that money could be used in the wild, even just a fraction of it, it could go a lot further. But a lot of those zoos, the Bronx Zoo and the New York Zoological Society have a field vet program, and they send vets all over the world to do a lot of conservation work. And a lot of the work from the money raised maybe at the zoo goes to support a lot of conservation work all over the world. North Carolina Zoo, where I did my zoo medicine residency, set up an organization called Uganda Community Tourism Association, UCOTA, and they were supporting community tourism. And they would actually get women from Uganda to make crafts at the zoo. People see them weaving baskets, and they want to support the people there. And they did give us our very first funding for the nonprofit. So it's just getting the zoos to give more to conservation, and then it's more justified why they're there. But the education element can't be underestimated. And that's why a lot of them are making an effort to put education messages on every exhibit. It's very, very important for that. And they're trying to do better welfare for the animals. Over time, I've seen that all the cages are getting bigger. There's more enrichment for the animals. San Diego World Safari Park was the best zoo we went to, obviously. The gorillas did not look, it was the best zoo. And my husband, who's not a veterinarian, was like, he didn't complain about the gorillas in San Diego. The other zoos, he was like, well, because when you see them in the wild, it's very difficult to see them behind in cages after that. Because in the wild, the silverback has got so much dignity. He's the boss. You're not the boss. He decides whether or not you see his family. If he decides you can't see his family, he goes away. If he charges, you have to be very humble. And that dignity is not there in the zoo. In the zoo, they are managed by man. They have no dignity, not much dignity. So I have mixed feelings about zoos, but I think they're important, and we still need to have zoos.
I just wondered, because I had gone to a zoo when I was younger in the Boston area, and they had to close it down because it was so poorly run. And so someone like you who had to see the gorillas in their natural habitat, it would be probably very disturbing to see a gorilla in a bad situation. So I'm glad that you're reconciled the fact that they have to exist, or they're existing. Yeah.
Yes. And now that we have so many gorillas so many animals in zoos, the whole idea is let the captive breeding be done within the zoo as they continue to improve on welfare for the animals. I think the only place that I know of where they tried to reintroduce animals back to the wild successfully, especially gorillas, was a zoo in UK called the Howlett and Port Lim Zoo, started by John Aspinall, who was a millionaire. And I happened to go to that zoo as part of my training in London. And they allowed me to go there because the head vet was actually born in Uganda. He's called Dr. Chris Furley. And they never used to allow anyone. He got to the point where he said, I don't need visitors at my zoo. But he used to do weird things with the animals. The owner of the zoo, the head of the zoo, he used to allow keepers to go in with the animals. But what I liked about his zoo is that the gorillas were in a proper family structure. It had an adult male with females and babies, and the enrichment was better than anywhere else. But because he allowed keepers to go in with animals, and a number of keepers had been killed by tigers, lions, cheetahs, and it was a public outcry. But he said, but the keepers sign when they come to work at his zoo that if they're killed by an animal at the zoo, the animal won't be put down. He's a controversial person. But after that, he went and reintroduced those animals, some of them, to the wild in Congo, Brazzaville. And we happened to go there because my husband got an opportunity to work with Ericsson. It's a telecom company. He's a telecom expert. And they sent him to Ericsson because he speaks French really well. So when we went they sent him to Congo Brazzaville because Ericsson had a project there. And I had an opportunity to visit, I met with partners, conservation partners, who are working on One Health issues. For example, I gave a talk to people at the Public Health Institute who are working with Wildlife Conservation Society. People there gorillas were dying of Ebola, and people who were eating them were dying of Ebola, which is a big, because in their culture, if you eat a gorilla, you become as strong as a gorilla. Whereas in Uganda, no one eats them because it was actually bad luck to look in the eyes of a gorilla. And so people were dying and they thought they were being bewitched. They didn't realize it's because they're eating, it's a disease, it's not witchcraft. And so I talked to them about how we're engaging traditional healers in Uganda to get them, to in our work so that they become better, they're more engaged in modern healthcare, and how they could do the same to prevent people eating gorillas that died of Ebola. But then we also went to visit the sanctuary that he set up called Lefini, and the researchers were very welcoming. They wanted us to visit. And when we went there, we saw those gorillas that were being released into the wild in stages. So we saw the ones that were like captive now in Africa. And then they took some to an island, and we went on an island on a boat to see how they were being fed. We're with our 2-year-old son. So actually saw gorillas younger than he should have. But it was really interesting. You could see that they're making progress, but it's very difficult actually reintroducing animals into the wild because they still had to feed them on an island because they were still used to being fed. And actually when they're in the wild, they should be out there completely not dependent on humans. So it's actually not even easy to introduce some of them back into the wild.
Do you see, since the gorillas are in contact with the communities, do you see any of the gorillas learning like how to use sticks and things to do things, or like farm implements? Do you see any of that?
Actually, that's a very interesting question, because I would say that the gorillas, they used to say that the only great ape that can use tools is man, until Dr. Jane Goodall did her study in Gombe, and so chimpanzees using sticks to put in anthills to get ants. The ants would go on the sticks and they would eat them. And so when she wrote back to Professor Louis Leakey saying that I've seen chimps making tools, he said either we have to redefine man or apes or wherever, It's a really interesting, and actually we're working with his granddaughter, which is a great privilege. She's a development director. I would say that animals, we've seen that chimpanzees, gorillas, they already had their own form of tool use. But when you're trekking gorillas, you're not allowed to go with walking sticks when you're with the gorillas. Because when the Peace Corps volunteers were starting out, when they came out to habituate the Bwindi gorillas, they brought their director to visit the gorillas, and they were using sticks, and the gorilla grabbed the stick and almost tried to beat them with it. So I'm thinking, did he learn it from the community, or was it something that he could do anyway? But they're able to pick up, when they're breaking open the leaves and shoots and stems, they're able to open the stems, eat the moisture, that's what they like to do. And they kind of, but I have a feeling they could have learned that from man, because they saw people holding sticks and they thought, I can hold this and get people away from me. I don't know, but that's an interesting one.
I have two questions.
Definitely
One,
the one, very curious.
okay, you are a town, obviously a veterinarian, you're a educator, everything. Okay, now you're an author.
Yes.
Did you write that book all by yourself, or did you have to have help? I used to just, you're like too many talents. That's what.
I would say that I wrote the book myself, but I got very good editors. Yes, I did, because I've actually always wanted to write the book when I just finished working as Uganda's first wildlife vet, and in the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and I got the opportunity to do a zoo medicine residency in North Carolina and a master's at NC State University and the zoo. I felt, okay, now this is the time I'll have to write, because when I was working for the first 4.5 years, I had no rest, because once they knew they have a vet, Now they made me work on all the other species and all the other issues which they thought maybe we need a vet. So I was very busy. And I thought, okay, now I'm going to have time. But the zoo medicine residency was very, very busy as well. I was working every single day apart from Sunday, you know. And so I never really got a chance to write, but I always wanted to write. And what I did is when I left the Wildlife Authority, I photocopied all the memos and all the letters and everything and reports, and I took them with me. And so that were very helpful when it came to writing. But I will have to say that I've always been someone who, I did really well in English. I mean, at school, I was good both in math and English, so I could have gone either direction. But because I like animals, I took the science route. And I remember the first reports I wrote when I came out of vet school. My older vets who were working in other countries said, it's too detailed. Because, for example, when we moved the gorilla, when we had to basically chase a gorilla back into the forest because we were unable to dart him again. I think I wrote like 5 pages about that. I wrote it like a story. And someone said, that's just too detailed. When we moved elephants, again, it was another story. Giraffes, everything was always a story. But when it came to scientific publications where it's very short and it's very dry, they said to me, you need to change the way you write so you can start publishing papers and publishing your work. And so I kind of stopped writing stories, and it was very factual and dry. But then now when it came to writing the book, I had to go back to writing stories again. So I had to make a transition. So my first draft was very dry. And actually my book agent is an English teacher. So she helped even before it got to the publisher. And she's like, but how did you feel about this? Like, you're just writing facts. Like, how did you feel? And then she said, go back to what you learned in English class and start. And so I had to do that. And it's been really interesting. I've loved doing it. You know, the difference between writing a report and writing a story. Writing Walking with Gorillas has enabled me to get back those skills which I had kind of lost because I'm now in the science world. And I think a lot of scientists have very important information, but they're not very good at communicating it because you're told in science, you're supposed to, it's very dry and boring. And people don't end up learning a lot from you because only people within your field can understand what you're saying. So it's really funny at the American Society of Mammalogists meeting, they're putting up formulas about ecology, and some of the younger African scientists who were there, I gave the keynote, they gave short presentations in the brief sessions. And one of them said to me, I think you have to make it very scientific because all the presentations are very scientific. He was giving me advice. And I thought to myself, well, I'm just I put back a few graphs because some of our donors who support us said, people don't want to see graphs. But this time around, I thought the audience, everyone's putting up graphs. But in the end, it was more of a combination of telling stories, and people loved the presentation. They really loved it. It was because they really engaged with it. And I still feel that even if you're presenting scientific data, you still need to tell stories. And Dr. Jane Goodall was very good at telling stories. Actually, another reason I was inspired to write is I used to buy her books even when I was a vet student. I think I have almost all of them. And so I was like, how does she manage to go out there, study the chimps, and find time to write? And I thought I can do the same. So I think she's one of the few scientists who's actually written very many books. And so that also inspired me. I thought, no, I can write. And when someone said to me, are you going to write a book for the academic or is it going to be for the general public? I said, I want to write a book for the general public, but I definitely had to have support. And the editor from Skyhorse was very good at, breaking things down. And I have to admit the book was too long at the beginning and they had to cut it by 1/3. And she said, no one can read a book that long. And then she pulled out the main story and she said, I'm going to have to remove some good bits. And that was a bit painful, but I think the book sounds much better in the long run.
Well, as I had mentioned, I mean, I catalog all the books that come in, so as they go by. And I think that if you had left it too scientific and too dry, I would probably have just passed it by. It's the human interest part that, said, let me look into this book a little bit more, So that's definitely, I think, a plus on that.
think it was a great education on the development of, you know, the community of the animals, especially the mountain gorillas.
Yes.
Really, you're learning so much, but you keep reading because of the stories.
Oh, great. I'm glad you kept reading.
Yeah, and I think this would be a great book for like also a teacher to assign to students to read, you know?
Mhm.
I think you're right. I would love for my daughter to read it as soon as she finishes her required high school reading. But with that said, I also have grandchildren, and I think you need or have maybe consider doing a young adult version, the YA for like middle school kids, and even
Oh.
a simple picture book for young children, because there's so much information. And I think if you connect with children when they're little, they can
Yeah.
develop the passion that you developed because of your brother,
Yes.
you know, bringing home all the stray animals. Now, with that said, I did not want my daughter bringing home any more strays because we have two rescue dogs. And I will preface it when I tell her, hey, you got to read this, because I think she would really love it. I think there would be such a great response for young children to have a version of this book that would be age appropriate. It's fantastic. It opened my eyes in a world I didn't even expect.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I can also say, growing up in New York, I have to agree with May because she brought up the Boston Zoo. Do you
Yes.
remember the zoo in Central Park, May? It was just awful. In fact, I still have pictures from the late 60s, early 70s, and it was literally cages with bars. That's all it was. And if you go there now, and the natural habitats, it's a pleasure to walk through. But as being a young child and going there, it was like looking at animals in jail. It was terrible.
Yeah,
And they look so miserable. I can imagine.
And the animals weren't happy, and you couldn't blame them. It was awful.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when they redid the Bronx Zoo. I think that was I went there right after they reopened it. Maybe that was in the 90s or something. You know,
I think in the late 80s. Remember they connected like all the zoos, the Queens Zoo, the Staten Island Zoo, Central Park, and the Bronx Zoo.
But it like caught on. They redid all the zoos, and it was really quite impressive, you know, and they had special events and stuff. When you went there were so many families with young kids. It was fabulous.
It is fabulous, but I like the education aspect of this, and to bring it into a classroom, I think would be great. In fact, I even wrote down your two books, the one your mother wrote and the one your son wrote, because I want to get the one your son wrote for my grandsons.
Oh, wonderful. And actually, we can get you a hard copy in which state do you live in?
I'm in Valley Stream. I go to the Valley Stream Library in New York.
In New York. Okay. I'm going to be in New York in October. So we could mail you a copy, but otherwise you can get it on Kindle as well. Which is not quite the same, but it's available on Kindle.
We do have a Kindle. But I don't know if you can see the room I'm in.
It's amazing. It's incredible. I love it.
It's my daughter's little library in our house. And there's something about putting a child on your lap and actually opening a book and reading it, as opposed to having a device.
Yes.
You know? So we are kind of old school with the book in hand, and
actually my nephew lives in New York. I've just remembered. He still has copies of my son's book. So I'll get him to mail it to you.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. And we will share it. We will definitely share it. Because this book, you couldn't put it down. You just, it was very well written. It was an easy read, but you can't help but open up your heart. to see how much the animals need and how much the ecosystem's balance between the humans and the animals. And the COVID, it was breaking my heart reading it.
Mm.
It really did.
Thank you.
It. And I love how you empower young ladies. I think that's awesome.
Thank
I
you.
think that's awesome.
Is that the case now? I mean, you're saying how initially the high school, you know, some of the girls barely got out of high school. Is there improvements in that now with like people like you being successful in your career?
There has been a lot of improvements. A lot more girls are now, you know, continuing with their education, which that's where it all begins. And parents are seeing the value of educating their daughters, not just their sons. And that really makes a huge difference. And then as far as we're seeing a lot more female rangers. Like when I started out, there was no female ranger. I was seen like a really strange person coming to the field, but I did have a unique skill. I was the only veterinarian in working in wildlife. So people respected me for that. And because they needed me, like, oh, the animal's sick. We need you to remove the snare. We need you to help with this. And that kind of made me not really see how are people perceiving me, because I was just determined to get the job done. And actually, I found that the rangers were they respected me a lot because I'm a senior person coming to the zoo. I'm coming to the field and working with the animals. And they would even make sure they walk slowly or they pull me up the hill and things like that. But now 20% of the rangers around Bwindi are female, and it's amazing.
That's
and not only that,
fantastic.
they carry guns, they're really fantastic. And they're the most dedicated rangers, I have to say, very dedicated. And they see me as a role model, and I just love hanging out with them, because at the beginning, there were no other females to hang out with. I was only hanging out with the men. But it's nice that they can, it's improving. They just seeing women doing that. They're like, it made people feel that, yes, it's a role that women can play and make a difference. So it's really nice. Maybe you should come out to Bwindi. I hope all of you can make it, and we'll make sure that it's a female ranger who takes it to the gorillas. I'll take it to the gorillas with the female ranger.
Well, we're almost hitting an hour. So if anyone has any last comments, because I don't want to keep the doctor, she needs to go to sleep, I think.
Conversation is so interesting, you know.
I am so glad that we got this opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Does anyone else have any comments they want to add before we sign off?
Okay. Thank you for writing the book.
Thank you.
It's just, you know, it's so important, you know, like the topics that you're doing, and then you yourself being, I should say, a role model. And I hope that's something that you'll be able to sustain. And are you ready for a second book?
Well, I've actually, one thing I found with the book is that I spent a lot of time writing it. And it was a bit of a struggle because there's so many distractions. I'm a mother, a wife, a head of a nonprofit. I'm a veterinarian, and so many other roles. And I'm a daughter. My mom calls me. She loves talking. She calls me several times a day. So, you know, and she's always, she's still a hands-on mom and hands-on grandmother. So, but now that the book is done, there's more time. Like I said, oh, I'm getting my life back. But promoting it is taking a lot of time. So Skyhorse Publishing actually said some authors take time off to promote their book. So I've done that. But I got to meet my editor who really helped me with editing the book. And she said to me, you know what, we left out a lot of good bits. You could actually write another book on this section. And she was thinking about it. And I was just like, okay, when I'm ready. So I think I'll definitely write a next book. I definitely will. Yeah. And actually, it's good you mentioned about the children's book. Someone has mentioned, you know, someone else has said, I could do a children's version. It's not that as easy as you think, because it's a kind of different writing. I'll probably need help in that as well. And a teenage version, I think, is also a really good idea. especially in Uganda, because the kids in Uganda they don't do as much reading as they do in America. So an American kid can read this book. And, a child in high school can read it. But in Uganda, they probably need a shorter version. And so that's probably the version that we need to work on, because it really needs to be accessible to them. I think they'll really enjoy it.
I mean, a lot of the books that are written for adults, sometimes they do hire an adapter. So maybe your editor would have someone who would help you with that. Because as I say, editing down and then is not maybe what if you had enough trouble you said that you had too much. Doing it a second time, I maybe a little bit too much. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think it was a wonderful presentation and book talk with us. It's a really, I'm very, very happy that you made the time to come talk to us.
I agree.
And thank you so much for your interest in the book and all the encouraging remarks. And I hope you share it with your friends and the networks and colleagues. And actually, I wanted to ask if any of you would like to receive our newsletter and updates. If you could share with us your email, that would be fantastic, and we can keep in touch. And you'll get to know when I write a second book, whenever that happens. But definitely, I'll be able to
contact everybody and then send it on to you. Okay.
Oh, great. And if you want a copy, actually, my mom's book is also available. There's some copies we left in America. So if you'd like to read, it has a lot of history about Uganda, because she writes a lot about, because she's 94 years old, so you can imagine she has that history of the country and how things used to be and how they've changed and how the role of women in society has changed over time. Because she's received a number of awards for her role in empowering the ordinary woman in society. And there's a lady from Wisconsin, Professor Eiley Tripp, who wrote, one of the people who endorsed her book, and said that she wrote a book about women and politics in Uganda. She's a professor in the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and she featured my mom in her book. And then when my mom wanted to write a book, she was very happy to write, and a very nice endorsement. So it's a very interesting book as well, because my sister really helped to find good editors for it. So it's also written well, and
I will try to share this information with the others too, and I'll get back to you about this. Okay. Thank you so much. I think it was fascinating. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Okay. Can the book club members stay on for a minute then? Thank you so much, and thank you, Connie, for assisting. And I appreciate you sending us the email, putting the information in the chat. And if you could send that to my email address, that would be great too. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And my mom's book is also on Amazon, but as you said, it's just the one that you have to read online. But if you wanted a hard copy, there are also some available in New York. And as a lawyer in Manhattan, so be happy to send them over.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Yeah.
I hope that you enjoyed that. It was so different.
Very different.
She was very delightful. I just wanted to let you know, okay, the next book we're going to be doing is The Spectacular by Fiona Davis. Okay. She is going to do the Zoom visit on Tuesday, August 8th at 7 o'clock. We're going to be doing it with the Westbury Library and the Franklin Square Library. So the books are there ready for you to pick up. Then we're going to have the discussion, though, at the end of the month, because she's got vacation on August 29th. So we had to do her Zoom visit on the 8th with the other libraries. So just to let you know, the book copies of the book are there. The reading guide is there, so you can pick it up. And then I will send out an email about whether you want to do the Zoom on the 8th with the other libraries. And then we'll be meeting then on the 29th to really talk about the book then. Okay?
Great job, Mamie. Thank you so much.
All right. So I have I just talked to an author who wrote about the women who served in the war. So that's going to be in November.
Which
Well,
book?
So we just have 3 more authors lined up for September, October, November. And it's just like, you know, some of them are really very generous about their time. I mean, this Dr. Gladys, I mean, for her to do this from Uganda in the middle of the night. She said her son was sleeping in the other room. Okay, so I will be, so if you want to pick up the other book, they're ready. And then, as I said, I'll send out the email. If you want to make the August 8th one, let me know. Okay?
Thank you, Mamie.
All right.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.